So Galatians chapter 5 is where I'd like you to be if you're not there yet in the New Testament. Page 9 of Lesson 2, Serving One Another. All right. If you were to go back to the end of the workbook, page 51, for just a moment, kind of neat there that the author has a collection of all the one another verses. And so Brother Roger Hillis here, every time you find those two words together in the New Testament, all the scriptures are listed on those pages, and there's 57 there listed. And so I think hopefully that makes what we're doing here, what we're focused on, stand out even more, that maybe, well, I didn't realize there were so many one another passages, almost 60 in the New Testament that are there. And so we're just taking some of them to emphasize. And so last week with Jeff Sharp, members of one another, is a reminder of how we're so connected to one another in the body of Christ, how we're dependent upon one another and need one another for the body to function as Christ intends it to function. And tonight focused on, as we already said, serving one another. So here in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 13, Todd, do you have that?
You said Galatians 5:13. For you were called to freedom, brethren, only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another.
All right. There's the motivation, should be, not obligation, but motivation ought to be in our hearts, a love for God and a love for our brothers and sisters in Christ, that when we do acts of service towards others and one another, that it's through love that we do that. What does the word serve mean? Let me give you just a literal definition from the word serve here in Galatians 5:13, according to Strong's dictionary. It means to be a slave, literally, to be a slave to, literally or figuratively, involuntarily or voluntarily, and I think we know what it means here. It means that we do that voluntarily, since it's through love that we would serve one another. Now, a dictionary definition is to be in the service of, to work for, to be useful or of service, to help. Matthew chapter 20, let's go there, please. Now, on the right-hand side of the page, on that margin, it talks about three key characteristics of a servant. I want to save that towards the end of our lesson, and so we'll kind of highlight some of the other material first. But let's go to Matthew 20 and read through these verses. All right. Todd's read for us, so Jesse, Lena, Phyllis, are you going to read? Good? Okay. Marissa's good. Whitney, you good with reading? Okay. Jeff? Let me skip, or no? Lauren, you good with reading? No? So go to Dad, that's all right? No? All right, we'll go to Brad then. So let's take just a verse apiece as we go through this, verses 20 through 28. That's right.
All right. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to him with her sons, kneeling down and asking something from him.
And he said unto her, What wilt thou? She says unto him, Grant that these my two sons may sit, the one on thy right hand and the other on the left, in thy kingdom.
But Jesus answered and said, All of you know not what all that you ask. Are all of you able to drink of the cup that I shall drink of, and to be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? They said unto him, We are able.
He said to them, You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant, and it is for those for whom it has been prepared upon my Father.
And hearing this, the 10 became indignant with two brothers.
But Jesus called them to himself and said, You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them.
Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant.
Gil, verse 27, Sam 28.
And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave.
Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many.
When you consider the gospel accounts, was this kind of an unusual scene or request or focus of the disciples? Seemed to come up a lot, right? I mean, the thing that makes maybe this text unique, Mark's account, Mark 10, it doesn't mention I don't think the mother coming, but here Matthew does, but it's a pretty common occurrence when you read through the gospel accounts. That seemed to be on the minds of the disciples a lot, right? About greatness in the kingdom. And of course, Jesus has been preaching about the kingdom. Back in chapter 10 of this gospel, he sent them out to preach about the kingdom, but their concept of the kingdom still was what? Must be physical, it's earthly, right? Even after his resurrection in Acts 1, it seemed to still kind of be their minds geared to that direction. But they misunderstood the nature of the kingdom and the citizenship of the kingdom, that it was spiritual in nature. But on this occasion, we have the mother of who? So Zebedee's sons were who? Yeah, so the mother of James and John coming to Jesus with what request? And by the way, why didn't James and John just ask?
Back in Mark 9, when they were having that discussion, or Mark 10, I think, and they were having a discussion, and they talked to, he asked them what they were talking about. Jesus did, and they wouldn't tell them, did they?
Right.
So they wouldn't acknowledge what they were even discussing.
Yeah, and then he, of course, knew what they were and addressed it. And I think that is Mark 9, where that is. But, think about sending mom, sending the mother. Maybe this will be more effective for us if we send, because, I'm sure there's a close relationship there with the family overall, but how did what was the specific request again that was made? Yeah, grant that these two sons of mine, verse 21, may sit, one on your right hand and the other on the left in your kingdom. If you're just joining us, we're thankful you're here. If you didn't hear, we're in Matthew chapter 20. The subject tonight is serving one another. We're focused this quarter on one another Christianity. But here in Matthew 20, so we have this request, and what is Jesus' response? Well, what did he say about those positions? Could he give those positions? For number one, maybe you just said that, and I didn't quite hear it. You don't know what you asked, right? They didn't. And he said, are you able to do what? And be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with. What's Jesus referring to? His suffering, his death. And they say, yeah, we're able. Again, they don't know what they're responding to or talking about. And he said, and Jesus knows what's going to happen to them. Yeah, you will indeed drink my cup and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with, but to have the honor to sit on my right hand and my left is not mine to give, he says, but for those to whom is prepared by my Father. How did the 10 react when they heard this? Greatly displeased with the two brothers. Again, not that they didn't oftentimes argue about the same thing themselves and ask and argue among themselves about which of them is going to be the greatest. Maybe they're upset they didn't think of this avenue themselves. But the teaching that follows, we have a contrast that Jesus makes between these kingdoms, right? Earthly kingdoms and his kingdom. And what's the contrast?
The ones that are great in his kingdom are actually those who are the servants.
Okay, and what's the focus in the worldly kingdoms? Kind of what their mindset is right now, and you don't think that way. He says right there in verse 25, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. But he says, yet it shall not be so among you. Question 2 at the bottom of page 9 says, what does it mean to lord it over others?
I guess, coercion, twisting their arm, making them do as much as they possibly can for their benefit, for the ruler's benefit, not for the people's.
Okay. So coercion, it literally means to control others, to subjugate, to exercise dominion over. Does this remind you that phrase, lorded over, reminds you of another place in the New Testament that this is mentioned? That's right. 1 Peter 5, with elders, Peter, who, by the way, heard these words on this occasion, he says something very similar to that about elders, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And so there's a great contrast between worldly kingdoms and the spiritual kingdom of God and of Christ. Norm?
How revolutionary this concept was back then when there were only kings and the subjects. And even for the Jews, you had the patriarchy of the fathers and how they were treated versus those that were below them and all of that. When I say that even today, you know, we have an example of the United States and other countries that have, you know, similar kinds of understanding of individual freedoms, but even today in the world, even in our country, this concept is a revolutionary concept.
That's what I'm about to chime in. It's pretty revolutionary still today.
Yeah.
Because we live in such a self-centered, self-focused world and society, that these teachings are still revolutionary, aren't they?
Sometimes we give them a bad rap and go, why didn't they get this? But this was unheard of anywhere outside of this group of people right here.
Right. Anyone else want to chime in? Okay. So here in Matthew chapter 20, after he said, yet it shall not be so among you, if you want to be great, become a what? Become a servant. So in other words, you need to do a 180 in your thinking. Instead of seeking out greatness in the kingdom, you need to be seeking out service. Right? Instead of seeking to be on either side of me in my kingdom, you need to be seeking out serving one another. And so whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. And you have to wonder what James and John thought about that, and of course the other 10 as well. But then he speaks of himself, just as the Son of Man was. Just as I did not come to be served, but to serve, and in the ultimate way, to give my life a ransom for many. Question 3 on top of page 10 said, how did the Son of Man serve his fellow man? We just hit the climax, the ultimate way, right? But, you know, when Peter is preaching and teaching the first Gentiles in Acts chapter 10, one of the things that he says about Jesus there in Acts 10:38 is how Jesus went about doing good. And you think about how he went about doing good, what was he doing? He was being a servant. He was serving others, right? And so what are some ways that he did that?
I was thinking of the passage where he's at the well teaching the woman, and they ask him, has he had anything to eat? He says, I have food that you don't know about, right? Because his food is to do the will of the Father. So it wasn't about, did he get his, 3 meals a day? It was about, there are people who need to hear the word, and he was willing to do that.
All right. So Jesus there at Jacob's well was what Todd brought up if you didn't hear him. John chapter 4, the disciples go in town to get food to eat. They come back eventually, urge him to eat. And he says, I have food of which you do not know of. And they're still thinking physical food. Has someone brought him something? And he speaks of his food is to do the will of his Father. And so what's Jesus focused on? Serving others, helping others, to bring them to him, to bring them to God, to bring them to the truth, which he did not only for the Samaritan woman there, but for many in Sychar of Samaria. Norm?
Things that he did, he was constant in saying, don't tell anybody about this.
Yeah.
Just go give God praise.
Well, yeah, and whether he was telling people not to say anything or not, think about how he was continually healing the sick and the diseased and the demon-possessed among the multitudes. I mean, we read that all throughout his 3-year ministry. And so, of course, his message of hope and encouragement as well. He gave light to those who were in darkness, and ultimately he died on the cross as the ransom, the purchase price to free a slave for the sins of the world. When you think about Jesus, everything about the life of Jesus was aimed at serving others. So what does that tell us as his followers? Our lives should be aimed at doing as well. Okay, did you raise your hand, Lena?
Well, just to add to your serving is that he would always go out of his way when he would walk somewhere, and Zacchaeus would come and he would just deter there to be with him. Or that woman that touched his robe, he stopped what he was doing and he addressed to her. He always got interrupted and he heeded to that interruption.
Right. And I maybe missed the first part you said. I don't know if did you say the children or not? But you made me think of the children as well, because when children are brought to him, sometimes even the disciples would try to intercede and rebuke the parents, and Jesus rebuked them, and he always had time to serve others, didn't he? Or as you said there, the woman that had the flow of blood for 12 years that had faith to just touch the hem of his garment, believing she'd be healed, and she was, and Jesus stopped. Who touched me? The reaction was, who touched you? Everybody's pressing up against you. Well, power came out of it in bringing out that woman. But and remember where he was headed. He was headed somewhere else. The ruler of the synagogue's daughter was gravely ill and died before Jesus got there. But he stopped to attend and address this woman of faith. And so that's another good example as well. Appreciate that. All right. Sam, go ahead.
And Jesus obviously served a lot of people when he was alive, but he continually serves those who are alive today by having demonstrated his example for how to live. And it's kind of cool to think about the fact that even today people are able to learn from what he did long ago, and I think he serves us in that way as well.
Okay. How does Jesus serve people today? All right, that's one of the ones that kind of jumps off right at the page for Christians. I mean, Hebrews 7:25 says he lives to make intercession for the saints. Isn't that a great act of service he does for us? What a great honor and blessing that he takes our petitions, intercessions, and giving of thanks before his Father in heaven, acting as our mediator or intercessor, right? Eric, did you have your hand up? No? Saw things? Okay. Anyone else have a hand up? Okay. And then question 4, what other lessons should we learn from these verses? These verses being Matthew chapter 20, verses 20 through 28. Anything else that stood out to you that bears emphasizing? See, I knew you had something to say. Go ahead, Erica.
So I thought it was really interesting, this lesson. Jesus is teaching about service. They're addressing him and knowing that he's their king, but yet he's saying, I don't even have this authority to give this desire to you. That this comes from God. Like, he's, as king, he's showing his own submission to his Father, and I thought that was huge.
Yeah. Okay. Well said. Norm?
The fact that true leaders and they earn the respect and the ability to lead. It's learned and it's earned.
Right.
And it's not, you can be a bad leader and be appointed to that, but if you're going to be a good leader, that is earned and learned, and it comes from below, coming up. And so the only way you get that is by that leader having gotten to that position, by earning the respect by what they did.
Right. Thank you. You know, aside from the cross, the ultimate service, before the cross, what's one of the clearest examples of service in the life of Christ that they surely never forgot? Yeah, washing the disciples' feet. Let's go to John 13. John chapter 13, please. All right. So Nate, we're going to start with you, and then Jeff and Andy. Bev, no? All right, then we'll come up here. And let's take 2 verses apiece. John, well, until we get to the end, because it won't be totally even, but 1 through 17 is what we're going to do. Go ahead, Nate.
Before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, the devil, having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him,
Jesus knew that the Father had given everything into his hands, that he had come from God, that he was going back to God. So he got up from supper, laid aside his robe, took a towel, and tied it around himself.
After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and wiped them with the towel with which he was girded. Then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet?
Okay, up here in front, 7 and 8. Verses 7 and 8.
7 and 8.
Yes, sir.
13.
Yes, sir.
Jesus answered and said unto him, What I do thou knowest now, but thou shalt knoweth hereafter. And Peter said unto him, Thou shalt never wash my feet. And Jesus answered him, If I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me.
Simon Peter said to them, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, He who is bathed need only to wash his feet, but he is completely clean, and you are clean, but not all of you.
For he knew the one who was betraying him. For this reason he said, Not all of you are clean. So when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table again, he said to them, Do you know that what I have done for you?
You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet.
For I gave you an example that you also should do as I did to you. Truly, truly I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him.
If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them.
Okay, thank you, readers. All right. So, why did Jesus wash his disciples' feet? He tells them and he tells us. Why did he do it? Okay, it certainly showed his humility. You call me Lord and Master, and so I am, right? You call me teacher and Lord. Okay. Teach them that they ought to serve others. What'd you say, Todd?
In verse 15 says that he gave them an example that they should do as he did to you.
Think about an example, right? Jesus is always teaching, but he was also always giving the right and perfect example. And you think about the power, we talked about this in our evangelism classes, the power and influence of a good example. I mean, Jesus talked about in the Sermon on the Mount when he said, you are the salt of the earth, right? But the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? You are the light of the world. I mean, that's our influence. That's our example. Let your light so shine before men that they may what? See your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. That's our example. And here's a powerful example, no doubt, that they would never forget the rest of their lives. The one that they believed to be the Christ, the Son of the living God, getting down and washing their feet and drying their feet with a towel which he girded himself, only recorded in John's gospel. Think about Peter's initial reaction to what Jesus was doing. What was it? Can we appreciate Peter's reaction to some degree at least? Simon Peter no doubt saw the incongruity and contradiction in what Jesus was doing. The concepts of God, because he believed him, he confessed it, that you are the Christ, Son of the living God, and servant don't necessarily go together in our thinking. And yet here we have God of the towel, right? We think of God as power and glory and holiness and majesty, and of course he's that and so much more. But our Savior was a serving Lord, wasn't he? That was his very nature, was to serve. And here's the epitome of that, I think, we're just before the cross. Norm?
Jesus was always one to use extremes in his teaching, and this is an extreme. This is the work of the lowliest slave who would be doing this kind of thing. And he didn't just like get down and do it. He took all of his clothes off and took a towel and wrapped himself, and then used the towel to wash the feet. I mean, this is as far as you can get into the servant mode that is available in this day and time. So, I mean, it is a powerful. You can imagine the shock.
Right. Yeah. Of course, Peter went from one extreme to the other, didn't he, Jeff?
I was thinking also back when
Jesus first started teaching him that he was going to go to Jerusalem and he was going to die there. And we see Peter again speaking up. And he said, he rebuked him. He took him aside and rebuked him for saying that.
Right.
And but yet Jesus told him, said, "Get behind me, Satan." So this has got to be.
You're not mindful of the things of God, but things of men. And again, understanding where the disciples were about Christ and the kingdom and what he's supposed to do, and the reality of what he was coming to do and going to do hadn't met yet. But question 2 on page 10 under John 13, 1 through 17, does verses 14 through 15 teach that we should wash each other's feet in the church today? Marissa, you said no?
Or something that we can do to serve others. It's not a specific instruction.
So Jesus was not teaching them how to wash dirty feet. They knew how to do that, right? He was teaching them to be humble, and Shirley touched on that earlier, humility. And in that humility, that should then lead them to serving others. And if I, your teacher and Lord, have done this to you, then you certainly ought to do it to one another, right? Okay. Norm?
It's also isn't that sometimes you think of service and you think of these big things people might do to serve. And this is the simplest, most menial task. And he thought that worthy enough for this demonstration. And I think sometimes we look at and oh, I can't do that, I can't serve in that way. It's just not good enough to do that. It doesn't take great things. It's the smallest, simplest things that we can do that he counts.
Yeah, and as I've read in the past, those who would wash someone's feet would be kind of the lowest of servants. And that's where Jesus placed himself, as the lowest of servants, to wash someone else's dirty feet. Think about, of course, first century, and the roads, and the dust, and the sandals, and the feet would be dirty. And for Jesus to do that for all 12 of them, one who was about to go out and betray Judas was still there. Peter, who would deny him 3 times, and all of them would forsake him. Him knowing all that, it didn't matter. I mean, it mattered, but it didn't matter and what he was doing here, that he was going to do it to teach them this lesson, of course, to teach us this very important lesson, right? Okay. Go ahead.
Think of the challenge too to them. We know what their mindset was towards this already, and think of the challenge that this would, of having your master come and do this to you, and you didn't get it. You didn't understand. You were shocked by it. Just the fact that you were shocked by it showed them how far they had to go, really, in the thinking. And it was shameful. I can see how they could feel how shameful they would feel that Jesus was being put in this situation.
Maybe embarrassed.
Yeah, embarrassed.
He was down there doing that. Yeah.
All these emotions.
Right. But their understanding will come a long way soon, right? Ephesians 5, before time gets away, we need to keep moving. Ephesians 5:21. Interesting, the placement of this verse right before the section of the role of wives and husbands toward one another. Of course, emphasis upon the church and Christ and his bride, the church. But right before verse 22 says, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. What does verse 21 say? Submitting to one another in the fear of God or the fear of Christ, depending on maybe the version you're using. So, who's that instruction for? All of us, right? Be a servant to each other, to one another. And so it's not just in the marriage relationship, there's different roles, but in a general sense for all Christians, we're to be servants to one another. It reminds me of what Peter would write later in 1 Peter chapter 5, in verse 5, when he says, likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. Yes, all of you be submissive to one another and be clothed with humility. And so here's a great emphasis by Jesus, by Paul, by Peter, throughout the New Testament. As Christians, we are to be servants to one another. Philippians 2, let's go there. Philippians chapter 2. Oh, where are you at? Oh, okay. Well, we're going to do 1 through 4, but 3. We'll include 3. Philippians 2, and where are we at, Daniel? All right, if you'll take 2 verses. Bill, can you take the next 2, please? Let's do Philippians 2, 1 through 4. So you got 1 and 2.
If there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort provided by love, any fellowship of the Spirit, any affection or mercy, complete my joy and be of the same mind, by having the same love, being united in spirit, and having one purpose.
Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out for not only his own interest, but also the interest of others.
Okay, what does Paul touch upon here that will help us to be a servant to others? What characteristics? Well, certainly love, right? And he speaks of lowliness of mind, right? Lowliness of mind, another word for that we've already emphasized is what? Humility, right? And he mentions how we should look on other people. How should we look upon others? It's more important. Easier said than done, right? Not in this society, but among God's people, that's to be the case, that we esteem, look upon others as better than ourselves. Certainly, also, he goes on to say that we are to look out for what? For the interest of others. We're going to look out for our interest and our family, but don't be self-focused where you are not thinking and going outward from yourself, and you're considering the interest of others as well. So, question 2 on top of page 11, why do so few people obey verse 4? What's that? Yeah. Because many, going back to what we've said earlier, many are selfish, are self-centered. We become busy in our own lives. We become focused on our lives, ourselves, our families, and sometimes and too often maybe to the neglect of others around us, right? Our brethren and those who are in the world. Gil?
The world teaches to cater to your own desires, your own selfishness. That's what they teach. That's how you win. That's how you win.
Yeah,
that's right.
Okay. All right, so let me hit the 3 key characteristics real quick because we've got 5 minutes or less. Those are listed on page 9 if you have the workbook or a copy of it. So right margin on page 9. The first one is put others' needs first. We just read that, so we don't need to read it again, but Philippians 2:1-4. Brother Hillis says the question should not be what's in it for me, but what do they need? People today focus on self. Jesus says think about the other person. In fact, if we kept reading where we stopped, what is the next statement Paul makes? Which really drives it all home, right? Let this mind, attitude be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. How he humbled himself. He became a bondservant. He was obedient even to the point of death on the cross. So that's what he goes on to say. Always setting Christ before the Christian to aspire to, right? Number 2, prepared to be inconvenienced. We don't like to be inconvenienced. We like convenience, right? And we get frustrated when something is not convenient, when something's not quick, when something's not fast, when something's not right away when I want it. And it's easy for all of us, not just people in the world, but for God's children to have that, slip into that kind of mode or mindset. He goes on to say opportunities to serve are often overlooked and undone because they are usually not convenient. Helping others takes time, it takes effort, it takes our time, right? Anything that is truly worthwhile usually does. Luke 10, what's that passage about? The Good Samaritan. Who didn't have time that day to help the man that was half dead? Didn't have time. I mean, people that you would think, hey, if anyone's going to help, it's going to be a priest, it's going to be a Levite, right? It's going to be those who are servants of God who serve the people. And the priest goes by, the Levite, he looks but keeps going. The hero, the one who loved his neighbor as himself, was the despised Samaritan. And he stopped. He took up his time, his resources, his money to take care of this man. And so Jesus asked, I tell you, of the 3, who was neighbor to him? And he said, the one who showed mercy. Go and do likewise, right? Okay. Make it quick.
Yeah, I'll just say, the other 2 weren't even, were told whether or not they were busy, but the Samaritan was. The Samaritan was on business, and he had to like, hey, I've got to go, but whatever you need, bill it to me.
That's right. That's right. We're not told about the other 2, but we are told that the other one was on business. Third key characteristic of being a servant, serve in unnoticed ways. We must be involved in the day-to-day lives of others, helping, encouraging, praying, working, serving even if no one else knows about it. In fact, Matthew 6:1-4 is about what? Those who want others to know about it, right? Those who do charitable deeds, they sound the trumpet, they get on the corner of the street at the synagogue, and they want people to know, look, all the good I'm doing for others. That ought to never be our thought or our motivation for why we are kind and loving and serving others. Who notices? The Lord does. Think about Matthew 25, right? The scene of judgment there. Lord, when do we come to you when you were sick, or give you clothing or food, or visit you in prison, when you did what? When you did it to the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. The Hebrew writer makes the point in Hebrews chapter 6, verse 11, God is not unjust to forget our works. He sees, he observes. All right, there was a lot more we wish we would have gotten to. Page 11, make sure you read through that if you haven't. Serving is a lot of good examples of different ways we can serve, and even ask for other ways we can serve. Of course, this lesson made me think of the beautiful hymn, Make Me a Servant. But next week, we'll move on to lesson 3, Care for One Another.